Hello, friends. It's Aunt Nikki of Your Story Hour again. It's time to read chapter 6 of How's Inky by Sam Campbell. And can you believe it? This is the next to last chapter in this book. These chapters have been longer, but fewer of them in the book. So we're almost done with How's Inky. We better get back to see what's going on. All right. Chapter 6, Courage, How Living Things Meet Life's Problems. We all have problems. Early during another evening, sometime later, Inky scratched at the cabin door, asking admittance. Now Inky was always welcome, but on that particular evening, well, at least we had been wishing that he would not want to come. There were 2 reasons for that wish of ours, and one was that Inky had developed a sense of humor that was almost sinister. It was autumn, and the frostbitten air had stirred Inky to such life that he was simply irrepressible. We had made some mistakes in training Inky, if training is the right word. Bobby said we might as well try to train lightning. We endeavored to show Inky the things he shouldn't do, and therefore those seemed to be the only things he really wanted to do. For instance, we tried to get him to understand the difference between the wood in our furniture and that in trees. Immediately he developed a passion for chewing the legs off chairs and tables, and trees were hardly nibbled. Then he discovered that we did not like to have him climb up on things in the kitchen. It was a wonderful discovery, and forthwith that was his favorite place to climb. But one stunt revealed Inky's impishness more than all others. He found that it annoyed us exceedingly, when he suddenly would grab one of our legs, cling to it like a super sand burr, and bite. In fact, that was his most trying trick, so it was the one in which he most persisted. He would sit aside in apparent contentment and innocence until someone would walk or stand near him, then make a sudden lunge for the nearest leg and cling to it with all his fiendish might. And there's a picture of it. Look at him! Inky really never bit hard. It was just the sensation of the whole maneuver that kept us on edge. There was such a threat to it. It gave one the feeling of standing on the edge of calamity with both feet on banana peelings. True, Inky wasn't very large, and we were the more powerful. Thus it would seem that we should have taken him off easily. But did you ever try to pick a porcupine off a tree? Just where are you going to take hold? It would be as pleasant as to gather a bouquet of cacti. We could get Inky off all right, but it was a painful operation. One foot after the other would have to be released, during which time he would make marvelous use of teeth and quills, crying resentfully all the while as if he were being the one abused. Then he would sit grumbling in a corner for a time, until the next opportunity came along. The story of that particular evening at the sanctuary has much, very much, to do with this fiendish fun of his. Now, the other reason we hoped Inky would find suitable use of his time in the woods that night was that we were having guests. In all, there were 12 of us assembled for dinner, forest rangers, naturalists, and their families. This was a sort of traditional dinner of ours, held each autumn to celebrate the passing of summer, the coming of fall, or something. At least, it was an excuse to get together in that spirit of good fellowship which is found in nature. The food of the occasion was prepared over the great fire. Our conversation was of the trail, the happiness, the freedom of life in the open. This was our time to share our adventures and experiences with each other, that our joy might be greater through the sharing. Hence our hopes were that Inky wouldn't interrupt this dinner. Since that was the thing which we least wanted Inky to do, that was what he did. And as usual, he did a thorough job of it. We just had been seated about the table. A platter of sizzling steaks had been taken up from the broiler, and everyone was bubbling with conversational happiness, when came the ominous scratching at the screen door. We tried to ignore it, but it persisted. Bobby looked at me, and the judge coughed because he didn't know what else to do. Our guests ate on in innocent bliss, little knowing what was in store for them. When the scratching had reached the point where the screen was about to be ripped asunder, Bobby quietly left the table and went to see what could be done. That statement is a bit misleading. It sounds as if more than one thing could be done. Inky wouldn't go away, and he wouldn't quit scratching. So that either we must let him in, or he would let himself in. We let him in. Bobby set him in the corner by way of bribery, surrounding him with cookies, apples, crackers, bread, and milk, while in futile waste of breath asked him to be a good boy, and left him. The guests laughed at the presence of a porcupine at the dinner, and said they were delighted that our famous pet had come in while they were there. We made no comment, but secretly prayed that nothing would happen to change their minds. To our relief, Inky took to his food, and seemed content with his corner. Our dinner went forward with the usual tone of good cheer. Judge Norton was bubbling over with wit, and kept everyone laughing until the food was somewhat neglected. But suddenly a forest ranger lost his smile, and in place of it came a look of surprise, somewhat mixed with alarm. "Ouch! Good heavens! What's that?" he exclaimed, as he pushed his chair back and made an effort to get to his feet. Bobby looked at me, nodding his head knowingly. The judge looked as if he suddenly had received some very bad news, and he had. "It's Inky," said Bobby, and then to the distressed forester, "Here, I'll take him." But Inky did not intend to be taken. Never had he seen such an array of feet before, and he was out to make the most of it. Giving the forester a final bite, Inky turned to the naturalist next to him. This man wisely climbed up on his chair to be out of reach. That was fine with Inky, so he tried the next guest. He too climbed up on his chair. The judge was next in line, and he stood on his chair telling Inky what he thought of him, his family, and all his ancestors. Bobby and I were trying to catch up with him, but were having little success. The little invisible terror went to the rounds of that table until everyone there was standing fearfully and precariously on some article of furniture. If that didn't present a pretty spectacle. Here was our annual dinner, a dinner for those who have learned to love the peace, quiet, and utter tranquility of nature, thrown into high confusion by one porcupine. There's another picture. In the meantime, Inky was wholly triumphant. Every foot had been chased off the floor, and he came into the open, acting tough. This acting tough, as we called it, was a most amusing little act of his. When he had done something that pleased him especially, such as the present riot, he would raise all his quills, then whirl round and round and round, chattering his teeth and lashing about with his tail, as if he were surrounded with enemies. Literally, it was a porcupine shadowboxing. For this is the way Inky fights. His tail is well stocked with quills, and when it strikes an enemy, it does much damage, driving quills in deeply. Of course, Inky was just playing at this in our circle, We were never hurt by it, though that evening our feelings were offended, for it looked too much like a dance of triumph. Bobby and I finally captured the provocative porcupine and carried him outdoors to give our guests a chance to come back to earth. They resumed their dinner, and from their laughter we knew that the event had passed without serious injury. Inky was finally flattered into climbing a tree. We praised him, told him how tough he was, and what a fine climber until, showing off and still feeling the effects of his triumph, he went to such altitude it would take him a long time to return. Then Bobby and I returned to our banquet and to cold food. But the spice of autumn affected all creatures as much as it did Inky. All nature is stirred to purpose and activity in these lovely, colorful, cool days. October had come with all its brilliant loveliness, and winter was barely over the horizon. How these little living things, know the season of cold is on hand, no one knows, but they know it. Squirrels, born that spring, never having known winter before, were busy storing mushrooms in carefully selected places in the trees, there to dry and be available when snows were deep and food scarce. Chipmunks were carrying nuts, cones, and seeds down into their remarkable underground homes to be available when needed. Beavers were felling trees nightly, taking branches into the water and making piles on the bottom of the lake, weighing them down with stones and water-soaked logs, so that they might swim under the ice and feed on this bark, while their other food was difficult to get. With larger sticks, they were making their dams and houses stronger. Bears were growing fat and lazy, beginning to gather cedar bark, grass, and leaves into selected hollows and caves, making beds on which they would sleep soundly until winter was gone. Deer had taken on their thick, dark gray coats and were feeding heavily to store up reserved energy within their own bodies. Indescribable beauty adorned the forest. No one ever has described adequately the beauty of the north woods in fall, the color of the leaves, the blue of the skies, the reflections in the lake. When one sees all this, he does not know what to say, and to depict it, he would not know what to write. It is just one of those things created for experience, yet beyond the realm of human expression. One day, the judge, Bobby, and I stood noting the whirl of activity about us. The world was seething with preparation. Blue jays were calling loudly as they flew about their tasks. In the distance, we could hear the call of crows and ravens. Chipmunks and squirrels fairly raced across the ground. Woodpeckers were drumming furiously. A ruddy joy was on the face of nature, joy in vital, purposeful activity. This whole thing teaches one grand lesson every single human being should know, said the judge, pushing his hat back on his head as he did when he was assured of his point. What is that, Judge? Asked Bobby. Courage, snapped the judge, with an affirming nod of his head. Every little scamp in these forests is facing things that are mighty difficult. They know it, and look at them tear in. Not a slacker in the outfit, not one whimpering, all of them standing up to their problems and looking them right in the eye. I tell you, everything about us is packed to the brim with courage. The judge was right. Nature boils with courage, and it would be well for every human being to cultivate that quality to the highest possible extent. This life is so planned that it calls for courage. The thing we generally do not realize until we study nature closely is that courage is one of the best protections from evil. It doesn't get one in trouble, but it gets him out of it. There is no problem these little creatures of the woods face, but that is solved better and more quickly because of their natural courage. The same is true in the world of human beings. Courage is an armor that deadens the blows of difficulties. It is fear that invites calamity, both in the animal world and ours. Our own little orphans were wise and courageous as the rest of nature's creatures, and instinctively were preparing for winter, though they had never known one before. Sausage already had entered hibernation. Somewhere in a specially prepared room of that remarkable underground home of hers, she had curled up her fat little self and would live in a land of dreams for 6 or 7 months. Bobette came to us no more. The wilderness now had claimed her completely. We missed her, and yet this is the way we wanted it. We wanted her and the others to live natural lives. Once, when the first few snowflakes were falling and we were taking an early morning hike, we came upon a fawn that we believed was our pet. We were rather close to the valley Bobette had chosen for home when we saw the fawn. At the time, it had been several weeks since we had seen Bobette. We startled a herd of 5 or 6 deer, and they raced through the brush, all save one who was about the size of Bobette and who had some of her mannerisms. That one bounded away for a few feet, then came to a stop and looked back. We called, "Bobette," repeatedly, but she just stood regarding us with intense interest, though making no move towards us. We began advancing towards her, a step at a time, talking in the tones she had known throughout the spring and summer. Once she took several steps in our directions, and our hearts gave a bound. But from the distance came that peculiar and stirring whistling snort, the alarm cry of the deer. This was the voice of her people. The appeal was irresistible. Without another moment's hesitation, she whirled about and was gone, herself repeating the cry of her kind. "Good-bye, Bobette, and good luck," we called after her. Inky, in addition to his mounting impishness, was showing other effects of the seasonal change. His coat of quills and hair was getting so thick it seemed difficult for him to carry it. While he returned to us frequently to upset our dinners and give us something to worry about, the forest was claiming more of him, too. Instinctively, he was locating trees that would be useful during the problem-packed days ahead. Besides, he had now taken unto himself a wife. We saw Mrs. Inky frequently, but did not gain her friendship. Rack and Rune were more beautiful than ever. Their fur coats were thick. We felt no concern over their comfort during the long winter now approaching. Through the most severe cold, they would huddle in their tree home and sleep, for they are hibernators. Yet they do not sleep as continuously and for such a long period as the bear or the woodchuck. Before the winter is far spent in late February or in March, raccoons are active again. It was during these October days that we had a little adventure with Rack and Rune, which showed us that they were not forgetting us, even if the busyness of life in the forest was taking more and more of their time and attention. Rune was injured. We do not know how the injury occurred, but believe that she might have fallen from a tree. When first we saw her, she was dragging herself along the trail towards our cabin, unable to use her hind legs. Her tracks showed she had been traveling in this manner for some distance. As we came to her, she looked up at us and reached up 1 foot to be taken. In her trouble, she needed the care of her human friends once more, and for this purpose she had come to us. We took her up gently and carried her back to the cabin. Rack soon appeared and stayed close at hand. We could find no broken bones, and prepared to give Rune protection and rest until she regained the health and strength natural to her. She seemed to understand that we were doing our best for her. Never did she complain in any way, nor did she make any effort to leave us. She was cared for in the cabin for nearly 2 weeks. During that time, Rack called nightly. When admitted to the cabin, he would go directly to Rune, stay for a few moments while greetings were exchanged in silent language, and then entered the forest again. We shall never forget the quiet courage and patience of Rune during that time of trial, much less forget the confidence and faith she had in us. Once she had begun to mend, she improved rapidly. She tried out her strength a bit more each day until she was completely recovered and able to join Rack again in their life in the forest. And now, for all the sparkling joy there was in the forest world about us, our spirits were heavy. The day was approaching when we must leave the sanctuary. The judge to return to his home in the city, Bobby and I to go on a lecture tour, which would keep us traveling all winter. It wasn't that we were sad just for leaving the forest. This good old world is all of one piece. The judge would be happiest at his city home, and Bobby and I loved the lecture field almost as much as we do the woods itself, as it gives us opportunity to share the things we experience at the sanctuary and to help others see more clearly how life should be lived in harmony with nature's pattern. All our heaviness came from one source. It was Inky. We never had the least doubt of his ability to take care of himself, nor did we anticipate that there was any enemy among predators that could harm him. It was just that he still clung to our companionship so determinedly. We were not fearful lest he be hungry or cold, for he was constitutionally equipped to meet these problems. But we did not want to think of him being lonely. Of course, we realized later that all our worry was for nothing. Inky was capable of meeting that problem as he was of finding food. In truth, our worry was not how Inky would feel, but rather how we imagined we would feel if we were porcupines and had been left behind. Once, for a brief moment, we talked of taking Inky with us. We could have done so, and no doubt he would have known a large measure of happiness to remain in the company of his human friends anywhere. But we quickly put that thought from us. Inky, who was born for the silences, whose instincts called for the even unexciting routine of forest life, to take him into the city in the midst of all that dust, smoke, and politics? No, it was unthinkable. So we faced the unavoidable proposition of leaving him behind. Our sympathies ran amok during the remaining autumn days at the sanctuary. Poor Inky! All he had was a porcupine paradise to live in, but we couldn't believe it was good enough. We built a little shelter for him under our cabin and lined it with an old mattress. Beside it we placed a mound of dehydrated dog biscuits, enough to feed all the porcupines in that part of Wisconsin. Inky calmly and methodically looked over our work, nibbled on a dog biscuit, kept his autograph in a corner of the shelter, bit his autograph in a corner of the shelter, and then climbed a tree as if to say, "Thanks, fellows, for your thoughtfulness, but I'll choose my own home." However, he did use the shelter at times, and the dog biscuits disappeared during the winter. No doubt raccoons, bears, squirrels, and other creatures came here to dine, but certainly Inky got his share. Then came the hour of departure. All our baggage had been loaded in the boat in which Judge Norton was seated, and Bobby and I had made a final tour of inspection to see that everything was all right. The 1st of November was just at hand. Leaves had dropped from the deciduous trees, and the courageous forest stood gaunt, strong, defiant, awaiting the coming of winter. There would not be long to wait. Each night ice was freezing along the shorelines. Each night we heard the call of the wolf, as though it were the voice of winter itself. As Bobby and I returned to the boat, Inky followed us. That was the one thing we did not want. Several times we had spoken of it. If only we could go away without seeing him there reaching after us. We talked of it again as we walked towards the boat. "Won't you please turn back, Inky? Won't you go and crawl up your tree until we are gone?" But the judge startled us with a sharp and deserved reprimand. "What's the matter with you fellows?" he demanded. "Here you go around praising nature and showing how much courage there is, and then you soften up like a cream puff. Nature does what she has to do, doesn't she? And she does it in the right way. You don't hear her whimpering, do you? Inky hasn't whined. and for all you know, he may be glad to get rid of you. Now tell him goodbye in a manly way, and let's get going." Bobby and I looked at each other a bit startled and smiled. Why, certainly the judge was right. This was something that had to be done. Why soften ourselves in doing it? Inky had everything in him that he needed. Even if he were lonely, he could meet that too. That was what we had been watching all these months, the completeness of the individual, and likewise the courage of every living thing. Did we think Inky had lost these qualities? Did we think we had lost them? That realization was all we needed. "Inky, old boy," Bobby said, picking up the porcupine and holding him high, "we have a little job to do. You expect us to do it? You have a job to do here, and we expect you to do it. What do you say, old boy? We part with a smile, eh?" Bobby passed Inky to me, and I played with him for a few moments. Then, as if to forestall any softness, Inky started getting tough. We had seen him get tough before, but never quite that tough. He ran at us and bit at our legs, and he whirled and whirled as if he meant to whip us right off the sanctuary. He chased us back and forth, up and down, and we laughed until tears came. It seemed as if he had decided it was up to him to handle this mournful occasion, to make the parting easy and free of sorrow. And suddenly it seemed to strike him that this parting should not be drawn out too long, for he started away on the run in the direction of his birch tree, his quills all raised, still vehemently acting tough. "Goodbye, Inky," we called in chorus. "Honk, honk, honk," one for each of us. "We'll see you in the spring, Inky." And the last thing we heard as we pulled away was Inky's insistent honking, as much as to say, "Go on, and don't think for a moment you'll be missed." But that porcupine had really put us in jubilant mood. We sang and laughed as we went our way, and the judge added one more verse to his ever-growing song. "Don't be afraid, my little man. Have courage in your heart. There's no ghost or boogeyman to give you a bad start. So when trouble comes along, just laugh and then yell, 'Boo!' You'll find out every time it's really afraid of you." Come back tomorrow for the last chapter in How's Inky. Bye.